What is up, my friends and fellow Busybees? I hope you're all doing well, and if you're a parent currently fending your way through the March break, may patience, energy, and many distractions for the kids be with you. You are all great soldiers, and you're going to make it through this, I promise. If you receive my weekly newsletter called the Friday Furniture Focus, which if you don't, what are you waiting for? I'll leave the link to sign up in the show notes of this episode. You know that last week's episode had me reminiscing a bit about my first projects and just how far that I've come in my business and in my abilities to do these furniture makeovers and execute them successfully, most of the time at least. And so I started thinking about my different techniques that have evolved over time or strategies and hacks that I've implemented that have helped me to do so, that I've learned from educational sources, other creators that I've seen sharing their tips, from trial and error. So I hope that I can be useful for you, whether you are brand new to furniture flipping and can take these on early on in your journey, or even for seasoned refinishers, there might be some things that you pick up or are reminded of that perhaps you haven't been implementing quite as often as you ought to be. So this will be at least a 2-episode series because I immediately had 10 different things that came to mind, and who knows, this might make some more thoughts come to mind for more episodes to come. So stay tuned for that. And personally, I think this style of episode is super helpful and useful, and as a podcast consumer myself, I know that I always love listening to and click on these episodes when I hear them on other people's shows, because I just think it's so valuable to hear lessons learned and things that people have done incorrectly and then corrected over time, because that just helps you to skip that learning stage and doing the trial and error when you take on the same kind of thing. That's exactly the reason why I listen to and turn to people who have been where I am, who have the success that I now aim to achieve, and who know exactly what it's like to go through what I do, because they're the ones that I can learn from. So if you agree and love this kind of episode and find value from it, as well as all the other episodes in the podcast, I'd love to hear. If you haven't yet done so, leaving a rating on the podcast player that you're listening on today is one way that I can find out if you're enjoying the podcast, and it also helps others to discover it when they're searching through and looking for something new to listen to. And if you really want to make my day, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere that allows it, letting others know why you love the podcast and who you would recommend it to. Special shout out to anyone who has done this to date. I always read them, and I appreciate it so very much because I know you're taking time out of your day to put that out into the world, and it just gives me so many warm and fuzzy feelings, so thank you. Alright, so let's jump into today's episode where I'm going to outline 5 mistakes I made early on while doing my furniture makeovers so that you can avoid making these mistakes on your own furniture flips. The first mistake I used to make was not priming my pieces. This is more specifically when I was going to be painting pieces because, as far as I can remember at least, I always used a pre-stain or wood conditioner prior to applying a stain to wood. However, a primer is definitely a product that I held off on unless I feel the piece really needed it in order to make the paint stick, like if I was painting a really sleek surface like a laminate. But on wood pieces, especially if I had scuff sanded, which I normally would, I would often just go straight in with paint and then a top coat of some sort. If I'm being honest, this was probably just me being lazy and not wanting to use more product than needed, but I have since learned better. And not using a primer under painted surfaces isn't inherently the worst thing, because assuming that you fully got the finish off of the piece when you scuff sanded, the paint is probably on there all right anyways. There's also more and more all-in-one type paints that state that they don't actually require a primer due to the paint's formula. So those pieces that I didn't prime back in the day may be holding up just fine. But these days, I always err on the side of caution and just go into each project assuming I'm either going to run into a huge headache of some sort or that the piece is going to end up in an absolute zoo of a home with pets and children and anything else that might have the ability to damage the piece. So I take all the possible precautions to ensure that the piece holds up to the best of its ability. In order to do that, I'm adding a primer on first. Doing this serves 2 different functions. First, it ensures that the paint is adhering to the piece that much better and more evenly and for a longer period of time and throughout different conditions that the piece may go through, like potential weather and temperature changes, either during transport or while it's in its new forever home. It also helps to counteract any potential bleed through that may already be coming through the piece or any that may come in the future, because if you've listened to episode 35, dealing with bleed through on your furniture makeover, then you know that the wood tannins may not be peeking through right at the time of you doing this transformation, and they may not even show through for hours, days, weeks, or even months post-makeover. For this reason, we want to do everything in our power to block those from coming through by using a primer that's either shellac-based or one that states it has stain-blocking abilities on the can or the container that it comes in. The second mistake I made back in the day when working on my furniture makeovers was not being vigilant in wearing my safety equipment in the workshop while working on my pieces. Now, luckily, I didn't have to learn the hard way or be reminded of the importance of this due to a huge accident that made me regret what I had been doing or not doing, because unfortunately, that is how many people learn this important lesson. I have seen some horrific videos on YouTube that seem to make their way into my algorithm, unbeknownst and unwanted by me. However, one time when I was wearing just like a pair of blue light glasses instead of actual safety glasses that had the wraparounds, when I was stripping paint off of a dresser with a heat gun, a small piece of a paint chip did fly into one of my eyes and adhere to my eyeball, and although there was no damage, it was incredibly uncomfortable, and after that I was like, okay, legit protective eyewear only, got it. And this extends to all of the safety equipment that you need to be having and wearing every single time when you're working on your furniture flips for various reasons. It keeps you from getting injured, keeps you protected from any chemicals or products, keeps your lungs and eyes and toes and everything covered and away from anything that goes awry. Just do it, please and thank you. I'm thinking of doing an upcoming episode specifically on protective and safety gear that you should be regularly wearing in the workshop, and the specific reasons for it and some of the science behind it, as well as my recommendations and what I use and wear. So stay tuned for that, because that may be coming if I hear that it's something others would be interested in hearing and learning more about. The third thing that I used to do when doing my furniture flipping that I consider to be a mistake for me personally, but maybe something that you do and works out great for you, is just working on one piece at a time. I know that for some folks, having one piece that they focus on and refinish that gets their full attention, it works great for them. Some people also just have limited time in the workshop, or maybe have space restrictions if they're working out of a small room in their house, or just a portion of their living room, or having their workshop double as a storage space in the home, and they only have the ability to work on one piece at a time, even if they would prefer to do more. But for me, having only one piece that I'm working on at a time is unideal for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I find it inefficient from a time standpoint because there are so many steps throughout the process of refinishing or transforming a piece of furniture that require you to do some work on it and then let the piece sit to allow some products to dry, whether it be after you clean it, add filler or glue, or after you prime, stain, paint, or top coat. So by the time I get out into the garage to work on something, get strapped into all my safety equipment, get a podcast queued up, because that's what I'm usually doing while I work, unless I'm looking to have a dance party and rock out to some music. It's just a lot of effort to only just do one step on a piece and then have to clean up, put everything away, and let the piece sit to dry. If I have multiple pieces on the go, I can instead move over to the next piece during that drying time and do the next step on that piece of furniture. And then once I'm done that, chances are I can go back to that first piece because it will be dried by then in some instances. Or if I have a third piece on the go, which, let's get real, I typically do, then I can move over to that one and my time in the workshop just feels much more productive and efficient to me. Secondly, I can have a short attention span sometimes, or just get bored of things easily. So if I'm working on a piece and start to lose interest in it, or more realistically, I hit a slight curveball and will have to do some research on something, or something that feels like too much effort in the moment for my lazy ass, then I can hop over to another piece that feels more fresh and fun to work on in that moment. Having multiple pieces on the go also can mean that you end up finishing and listing pieces for sale much more frequently if you have the pieces staggered out in which step they're at, or alternatively, if you do batch work on the pieces and, for example, clean them all at once, then repair them all at once, then prime them all at once, etc., then you'll end up with multiple pieces being finished at the same time, so you can do a big drop of new pieces to your clients, which can be a great way to go about it too. The fourth mistake that I made when I first started doing furniture makeovers, and honestly, one that I find myself still struggling with on and off to this date, is bringing in pieces that just aren't worth my while. The thing with doing furniture refinishing is that you probably got into it, at least some of you, because you wanted to reuse existing furniture and not let so many furniture pieces end up in the landfill. I know that was one of my reasons for doing so. Perfectly good furniture that just has a little something off with it, but something totally fixable that you could tackle and then refinish and it would be as good as new. Except that sometimes that quick and easy repair or thing we need to tackle on the piece isn't quite so quick and not as easy as we had assumed. So we have just taken in a piece, committed to working on it, and maybe even already gotten through a substantial part of the makeover process before we had to tackle that certain thing. So that could already be time, effort, products, and thus money invested in this furniture piece. Then, because we're human, there's a sunk cost fallacy. And if you've never heard of it, a sunk cost fallacy is a phenomenon where a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or a course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. So in these cases, I've already done some work on the piece, so I don't want to just chuck it out the door if I hit a barrier or a roadblock. But then at the same time, I have a history of just moving these pieces to the side to start on a new piece and then never fucking finish the first one that I started. And I know some of you are laughing because you've either already heard me talk about being queen of the 82% club, or you've heard me talk about having to take specific weeks where I set aside my focus on actually completing these projects finally so they stop taking up all of my space in the workshop, or you're laughing because you do the exact same thing. Which, selfishly, I hope is the real reason so that I know that I'm not the total worst person ever and I'm not alone on this one, but something tells me that I'm not. So essentially, by taking in these pieces that I ultimately just really wanted to save from getting tossed out, I've now unintentionally added something annoying to my plate, added potential stress, taken away some of my space in the workshop that is very small if you've seen it, and taken my time away from the more efficient pieces that I could have been working on in the meantime. And taken this piece away from potentially someone who could have came by and snagged it and been able to accomplish the thing on it that stumped me. So I have to remind myself that I can't save them all and need to be a bit more choosy, especially now that this is my full-time job and not just a fun hobby on the side where I can afford to take as much time as I want on my pieces and just frig around with them. So I know someone out there needed to hear that because I know there are so many of us that have just endless inventory and backlog of pieces that we have gotten but aren't yet working on. So I want you to evaluate whether or not every single one of those pieces are ones that are efficient and make sense for you to have and to eventually work on, or were they just ones that you didn't want to see get thrown out, or maybe you selfishly just wanted to snag so someone else couldn't have them? I don't know, maybe. Just saying. So although time to time I do encounter this still, I am much more vigilant now when I am grabbing a piece to look it over very thoroughly so I know exactly what I'm getting myself into when I do grab a piece. And honestly, this is why I don't get pieces off of Facebook Marketplace as much anymore, because I just started to notice a pattern where people either didn't notice the type of damage or issue that there is with their piece, or they do notice and just decide to not disclose it in the ad. But I like to believe it's the first one and it's just like some blissful naivete. And I often will just dumbly pay for pieces before I pick them up just to make the process more efficient and whatnot. So anyways, that's my own fault for doing that and ending up with these lemon furniture pieces sitting around for months or maybe even truly like over a year before getting finished and out the door. So that's on me. The last mistake I made comes from a great lesson learned and hack that I now do on almost all of my furniture makeovers. But before I get to that, I wanted to let those of you who are new to furniture flipping or have never done a furniture makeover before that I have a resource that will be incredibly helpful to you when you tackle that first flip. I have released the No BS guide to your first furniture makeover, and you need to get your hands on it. It walks you through my framework step by step for completing your first furniture makeover, whether you want to paint, stain, or some combination of the two on your piece. It also comes with my first furniture makeover supplies checklist, which will make sure that you're set up for success when it comes time for you to sit down and finally tackle that piece of furniture I just know you've had sitting around in your garage for ages with the intention to flip, but you've been nervous to take that leap in case you screw it up. Rest assured that with this guide, I will take your hand, pump your tires up, and get you rolling through from start to finish on that beautiful furniture makeover I know you have in you. So I'll link to that in the show notes of this episode if you're interested in checking it out, or you can head to my website, MelDidItHerself.ca, and I hope it gives you the confidence that you're looking for to handle that flip with ease. And finally, the fifth and final mistake I made early on in my furniture painting and refinishing days was just applying regular polyurethane over my pieces, particularly the dark ones like navy blue and blacks. If you have ever done this before and found that there was a bit of a milky hue that remained when the poly dried, or you noticed some streakiness that you have tried over and over to remedy, but you couldn't quite get it right, then listen up. I noticed this particularly when using a poly in a matte finish because there is a flattening agent like a silica that is added to the matte versions to give it that flat matte finish compared to having more of a sheen. So this is what you can sometimes see through on these darker pieces. And in order to avoid this, again, specifically with dark colors, but it works well with any color really, is to mix in a bit of paint into that top coat. This is just like tinting a primer so that the product that you're applying to that finish is more similar than dissimilar in color, so you don't need to do as much work to get that flawless finish. You don't need to add a lot either. I'll usually just pour into a separate container however much poly I think I'll need for that piece, and then a little some extra because brushes and rollers and sprayers can eat up more product than they need to sometimes. And then I'll just do a little dollop of paint into it. Mix that up thoroughly so you don't see different color streaks of each of the products and so that it's mixed up well, and then you're good to go. It's surprising just how effective this small but easy step can be and make such a big difference on your piece, but I promise it's going to save you a headache or two. And something you may not know about me, I love little motivational messages. They always get me fired up, and I keep a running list of ones that are especially catchy or speak to me in the Notes app on my phone. So I end every podcast episode with one of those that I've noted down over the years in hopes that you leave our time here each week feeling inspired, motivated, and ready to take on whatever comes your way this week. So this week's Mel's motivational message comes from a book that I read recently called Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. I've previously mentioned the book The Obstacle is the Way, which is the first part in this 3-book series. But this is from the second book, Ego is the Enemy, and it states, "No matter what you've done up to this point, you better still be a student. If you're not still learning, you're already dying." And there's been a few different messages over the seasons that have been essentially this notion that we need to be lifelong learners. And if you're here and listening to this, I know you probably already are anyways, but I think it's such an important reminder to have that just because we may no longer be in school, or we may not be active readers, or we may not watch documentaries, or whatever it may be that you kind of put on that pedestal of being like, this is how I learn, or this is how I would be learning day to day. There's so many ways that we can integrate that learning into our day-to-day life and make it enjoyable for us and make it be kind of like passive as well. Like I mentioned, I'm always listening to podcasts when I'm in the garage working on things, when I go for walks with the dog, when I'm at the gym. Like there's so many points in my day when I'm driving as well that I'm having these different podcasts on. Some of them are just for kind of mindless talking and just kind of keeping up with people that I enjoy listening to, but a lot of it is really educational stuff and learning from experts and hearing dynamic conversations and people, defending their own points and hearing both sides of different arguments. And that's how we pick up those facts and this knowledge and these critical thinking skills. And we continue to learn and expand our minds and our brains and keep them sharp, because especially since I've been working from home, especially so since I've been working for myself, my brain isn't quite as sharp as it used to be. I'm just going to say it. I was talking to a friend about this recently and just saying how my word recall and my just mental sharpness and clarity kind of seems to be going away the more and more that I sit around and do a lot of thinking throughout the day, but maybe not as much talking to other people besides my husband and whoever else is hanging out with me that day. So this is why keeping up that mental dexterity and finding those ways to learn, even if you are still in school or in a context where you are being quote unquote forced to learn certain things, I think it's so important to find those things that interest you, something that you have an inherent curiosity about or an interest in, and just deep diving and finding out all you can learn about that thing. Because you never know what you're going to gain from that, what kind of piece of trivia or information you may pick up that might be useful to you down the road, or that might turn into a full-blown obsession or a business, just like this furniture painting and refinishing eventually turned into for me. I started out having interest in interior design and home decor and just kind of watching videos about that stuff, and then that kind of trickled into some little DIY home decor projects, which turned into me doing some home renovation things, which trickled into needing furniture to put in those rooms that I was decorating, and eventually turned into this thing that is now kind of my whole world. So you never really know where it's going to take you. Make sure that you're a lifelong learner and student, because if you're not still learning, you're already dying. Don't let your brain, your mind, your knowledge, your abilities get complacent and stagnant for the rest of your life, only to eventually start declining in your old age. Always aim to be increasing those things and moving yourself forward, whatever that looks like for you, in whatever realm or topic that makes sense for you. Because you're only ever going to get positive returns on that investment of time and effort and energy and brain power. I promise you. All right, that's it for now. Make sure you tune in to next week for the next 5 mistakes I made early on when doing my furniture makeovers and how you can avoid them moving forward. I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you guys next week.